While Mordecai sat in the king's gate, two of the king's chamberlains were talking, and he overheard them because they were plotting to kill the king. So Mordecai gets a message to Esther to make sure that Esther knows so she can warn the king. Interesting. This will play very importantly as we continue through the story. When inquisition was made in verse 23, it was found out, therefore, both of these men were hanged on a tree. And it was written in the book of the Chronicles before the king. And that's key to remember as well.
That's right. That little detail, most are like, well, of course it got written. Who cares? Well, if it hadn't gotten written, then the rest of the miracle down the road wouldn't be able to play out, because there's going to be a night when the king won't be able to sleep and somebody's going to read this to him. So just hold that thought as we now jump into chapter 3.
So this is where Haman enters.
Every good story needs a villain.
A villain.
Don't they?
Yes.
And Haman is about as good of a villain, or as bad. How do we say
probably
that?
Bad.
As bad of a villain as you're going to see. This guy, he's a work. You'll notice, he is an Agagite. Now, the last time you heard about Agag, or this group of people, they're Canaanites who were in the land of Canaan when the children of Israel came through the Jordan River with Joshua. And they're part of this group that was supposed to be driven out of the land. You think there might be some cultural clashing when this Agagite is going to eventually find out that Mordecai is a Jew, this group that tried to displace them from off of their land in Canaan. He's not going to be a fan of the Jewish people, as we see in the rest of this story. So what happens in verse 2, it says, all the king's servants that were in the king's gate bowed and reverenced Haman, for the king had so commanded concerning him, but Mordecai bowed not, nor did him reverence. Which, by the way, just as a side note, if you ever find yourself in a situation of power and you want people to show their reverence to you by bowing down to you or paying some sort of obeisance to you, then I would just say be really, really careful, because the only people we know in scriptures who demand that kind of thing are usually types and shadows of the devil, because that's all Satan ever wanted in the premortal life in the first place, was for us to give him all of the power, all of the glory, and to lift him up at our expense. And that seems, so Mordecai not bowing down, it's almost this defiance to the devilish tactic that Haman is playing out here. I want the power. I want people to bow down to me. And he's not going to give it to him.
No, and I think Mordecai, he was a good man. And he honored and loved the Lord. He was a faithful Jew. And there was no way he would submit to worshiping another man. That was not in his nature to do that. He knew who he worshiped and who he would reverence, and it was not Haman.
And you can imagine one of those, the first time it happens, it's like, okay, maybe he didn't understand the second time, the third time, and it's happening multiple times. You can picture them asking, why aren't you bowing down? This is Haman. You have to bow down to him. And eventually they figure out, he probably told them, because I'm a Jew and I refuse to bow down to anybody but my God. At the bottom of verse 4, it tells you that. For he had told them that he was a Jew. Well, at that point, something switches for Haman. When Haman saw that Mordecai bowed not, nor did him reverence, then was Haman full of wrath. Are you noticing in scriptures, whenever you get people who are progressing along the covenant path, trying to become more like Jesus, they're going to become more peacemaking. They're going to be more merciful, more long-suffering, kinder, gentler, more firm when needed, but it's never in a wrathful way. But when people turn themselves over to the influence of the adversary, it often leads them down this path to become more like him. And you're watching that happen right in front of our very, very eyes here on this page, that Haman becomes full of wrath. Well, that's a word that scriptures describe Lucifer. When his offering isn't accepted up in heaven, his countenance fell and he becomes angry and filled with wrath. So perhaps a little invitation to all of us is consider, as we move forward in our relationships, the degree to which we allow ourselves to continually get stirred up in wrath and in anger versus my favorite primary song. I'm trying to be like Jesus in all that I do and say. It just has a totally different feeling to it.
And our prophet is teaching us to avoid conflict and wrath and anger and hatred. We just heard that so beautifully from him.
So he takes out, check this out. He has an issue with one man. So what does he do? He then multiplies it and extends it out. Verse 6, and he thought scorn to lay hands on Mordecai alone, for they had showed him the people of Mordecai. Wherefore Haman sought to destroy all the Jews that were throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus, even the people of Mordecai. So now he's going to take his hatred for one man and extend it out to everybody that man now represents, his whole tribe, so to speak, of not just Benjamin, but Judah, the whole kingdom of these Israelites that live.
That's wrath. That's wrath.
That's wrath. That's unbridled wrath, right? And now you get introduced to how he picks the timeline for when he's going to set forth his plan to destroy them. In verse 7, it tells you that he cast pur. They cast some dice, or they cast some lots to randomly pick, okay, what month are we going to set up to destroy the Jews? And it just happened to be the 12th month, way down the road from where they currently are. And you say, well, that was just coincidence. The dice were really nice to them. Or are the Lord's fingerprints on that one as well?
Again, it happens. It turns into a great blessing because it provides time for Esther and Mordecai and the Jews. Now, it's interesting because Haman saw it, though, as a positive, because he thought, oh, the Jews will be afraid when they find out that they're going to be killed. And so many of them will just pick up and leave. They'll hurry away and move away and leave all of their possessions. And then I can go and capture those and bring them to the king's treasury.
So with all of this master plan going on in his mind, he doesn't have the authority to pass the law. And he doesn't give all of the details to the king. He just goes to him and he says, notice the wording here in verse 8. There is a certain people scattered abroad. He doesn't say which group or where they're from or what they're doing. Specifically, he just says, they're dispersed among the people in all the provinces of thy kingdom. And you saw how widespread this kingdom is. And their laws are diverse from all people. Neither keep they the king's laws. Therefore, it is not for the king's profit to suffer them. And so he talks the king into passing this law, and the king just gives him his ring, the signet, to sign into law. Do whatever you want to do with that group of people. They sound like a nuisance. Let's, take care of it. So Haman's master plan is now put into place with the date on the calendar in verse 12 saying, then were the king's scribes called on the 13th day of the first month, and there was written according to all that Haman had commanded unto the king's lieutenants. So we're in that first month, and because of the pur that was cast, the lot that was cast, we now know that in the 12th month, and keep in mind they use a lunar cycle, a lunar calendar, 28-day month in most of these ancient settings. So it gives us that time. And they now send out that law to all parts of the province. And all of the Jews get the word that the clock is ticking for you.
May I read that in verse 13?
Please do.
It's so profound. To destroy, to kill, and to cause perish all Jews, both young and old, little children and women, in one day, even upon the 13th day of the 12th month. It was genocide is what they were really considering.
This is probably a good place to pause and take a little time out and point out, if we're not careful, what ends up happening when we read scripture like this in the Old Testament, or even in the Book of Mormon or the New Testament, we can get so excited about the details and the facts from thousands of years ago, thousands of miles away, that we could get so enthralled there that we miss some of the power of Scripture, which is when you don't just see the fingerprints of God or this invisible hand setting up these dominoes for Esther and Mordecai, but those should become placeholders, types and shadows for your life, right here, right now, today, to say, wait a minute, our God changes not, and he does his work throughout time in a variety of ways, some of them really open and miraculous, and some very subtle and very behind the scenes. So as we continue through this story, we hope that somewhere in all of this, you're seeing in your own world that we live in today, where God has been setting up dominoes in your life to prepare you for some things. And maybe it feels bizarre, some of the things that have been happening to you recently or in the past. But if you plead with heaven for eyes to see and for a heart to feel and to recognize, then you're more likely to see the hand of God guiding and shaping your life just as it did theirs all these years ago.